We are on officially the fourth commandment of the Old Testament, or the 10 Commandments. And what is that fourth commandment? Keep the Sabbath is the fourth commandment. And that's what we're looking at this morning. Now, I say it couldn't have been any better timing because, as someone told me, it was Labor Day tomorrow. What's the purpose of Labor Day? Yeah, it's a day of rest from our labor. It's a day to appreciate the labor that you've had, what you've been able to do, and also some rest from that labor. How's that relate to the Sabbath day? Sabbath day also was a rest. Does anyone know what the word Sabbath means? By the way, as you're thinking about that, I'll get your answers in just a moment. But you think about that, isn't it interesting how many words we use that we assign meanings to them and sometimes kind of forget what they really mean? Now, you might not have forgot the word Sabbath because it's a Hebrew word, root anyhow, it's transliterated. What's Sabbath mean? Rest, yeah. Literally to cease. To cease. Now, where does it originate in Scripture? I didn't expect Ernie to be on that top of it. Absolutely. In Genesis, the second chapter, right, Ernie? Oh, well, you has most of the way there. Where is the first occasion we read of the Sabbath? Or what, we already told you it's Genesis 2, so that should help you. What is the occasion around it? Creation. And in particular, the completion of creation, right? So let's look at, if you would, let's go back to Genesis 2. And while you're turning there, I want to say hello to Diane Fiscus as well. Diane, it's good to have you with us this morning. And also Kathy. It's good to have you with us as well, Kathy. And it's been a while since seen you, but I'm glad you're able to be with us and see and hear us. Genesis 2. All right, let's find it here because where at? Thank you, Ernie. You want to read it for us since you're there? No? Okay. I'll read then. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work, in what he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. Now, some questions here. The Hebrew word used here is Sabbath, that we use. As I mentioned before, it means to cease. I think you can see that really well. We translate it, he rested from his work, or he ceased from his work. Let me start by asking this question. Why did God rest? Say that again. Okay. It's an interesting concept there. I'll first comment on Mike's. Mike says to take everything in, right? And to appreciate it. Kind of like when Becca finishes a new job, whether it's a piece of clothing or a meal. She stops and admires it for a second, right? Yep. She doesn't, depending on what company she's in, she doesn't have time to admire the meal, right? Yeah. So, very possible. Ernie brings up another reason, though. And I think that's very likely, Mike, and I think there's probably something there to that. But Scripture's kind of silent, to the best of my knowledge, on that idea. We can relate to that, so it's a good example. Ernie, what did you have in mind when you said example? Setting a precedent. For who? Me? Oh, there's a scary thought. Future generations. Yeah. Here's, I think, a big point. Was God fatigued and just wore out? No. If God was unable to, if God did not rest on Saturday, was he not going to be able to perform on Monday? You think he was? Because let me restate that. Is that not the case with us? Mike, what time do the lights go out at my house on Saturdays? Oh, you do so. You're constantly gawking out the windows. You've told me your lights go out early. Oh, you have so. I think I have it in text form. We'll sell this later, though. Number one, I'm not fond of losing sleep in general. That's just me. But number two, on Saturdays, I make a point of getting to bed earlier than usual. Why? Well, Amanda can tell when I don't. You folks aren't sure what's happening, but I struggle on Sundays if I'm not well rested. It's easier to perform physically when you're a little bit fatigued, although it has impacts there too. It's a lot more difficult to perform mentally when you're fatigued. So for me, here's my point. If I don't get an appropriate amount of rest, it affects what I'm able to do in the future. Is that the case for God? Oh, it's almost like you're afraid to answer. Some of you are. No. Everything we know about God says to the contrary. In fact, did you notice what he rested from? Verse 3. What did he rest from? All of his work? Very close. And you know, I didn't read King James, so that might be, that might be where some of your answer. Oh, okay. But read the next phrase. Which he had made. So here's my point. And I didn't realize how I would have asked that different if I read from the King James. Here's how the ESV reads, and then we'll tie the two together. God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. Right? Jerry read from the King James all of his work that he had made, all that he had made. Here's my point. God didn't sit and do nothing. He rested from his creative work, from creation. How do I know that? Well, we're going to see in a little bit, Mark the second and third chapter, Jesus is called out on the Sabbath. And one of his many responses was, my Father works on the Sabbath, therefore I do. we can be grateful that God doesn't have to completely rest, right? That he's still active. We read that Christ, Jesus, was creating force and that he sustains the creation, right? He keeps it going. So my point is, in all of that, God is not resting because he's just so weary he can't physically go on forward. He's not resting because he's protecting himself. He is resting because, as Ernie and Jerry pointed out, he is setting an example for future generations. Why is that so important? While you contemplate that, I want to say hello to our friends and brothers and sisters in the north. There in Canada, at the Robertson household. It's good to have you guys with us. Why is it so important that God set this precedence? Or what is the significance that he did it for an example? Silence is uncomfortable, but thinking is good. Okay, he's never asked us to do something he wouldn't do. Great point. Who was the Sabbath for? For people, right? Yeah. For mankind. Now, she says Jews, and we're going to look at the Old Testament law. She says that for good reason. But it was for people. To me, this is symbolic of, and I believe as Christians, we've got to do a much better job of recognizing this, living it, and conveying it. That God's laws are not just these random orders. Let's see how much I can make them do. Rather, they are for our benefit. And that's why he's laying the precedents down here and resting on the seventh day. It's for mankind's benefit. Now, as you turn your Bibles over to Exodus 20th chapter, because we are looking at the fourth 10 commandment today, I'm going to ask you to self-diagnose here, or self-evaluate maybe. Just so I know how many of you are familiar with the terms I'm speaking of, I'm going to ask the opposite question first. How many of you do not consider yourselves type A personality? You don't know what I mean by type A or type B, just don't raise your hand. Anyone? Okay. Not too many. Now we'll see how many of you are familiar with my term. How many of you consider yourself type A personality? And you can correct your spouse. You may know better than they do. Okay, so not too many hands up either way. Type A personality typically is highly competitive, highly motivated, full of action, right? And typically full of anxiety. Now, I'll describe myself in these areas. When I am stressed, let me ask you this. This will answer the question. When you are stressed, how many of you need to relax, get away, go to the beach, do something along those lines? Raise your hand if that's the case. I want to raise my hand to encourage you, but it's not the case with me. Okay, a handful of questions. Now, that's not me. If I am stressed, the worst thing I can do for Amanda's well-being is try and relax. Right? And Amanda will tell you, man, he is miserable to be around. I probably know someone else when his garage is full of vehicles that does not get in better frame of mind when they try and relax. Now, this is my point. When I'm stressed, I really need to be working towards something. There's times in my life where finances have been very scary. And my release to that is to find something productive to do. Because in my mind, I am doing what I can do. And man, everything else, and I will work myself physically till I have physical problems because it alleviates some of my psychological pressures. Now, I'm opening myself up to you there a little bit to get at this point. Type A personalities are very, very prone to that. But are we not all prone to seeing our life as our own responsibility? Some of you are shaking head again. We're showing some personality differences. That's okay. This is what's going to get to the point of the Sabbath. I think what we're going to see going forward is A, it is needful and good for mankind to have rest. It's not something we're good at finding a balance to. We tend to go one way or the others to extremes. It's good for rest. Secondly, psychologically, it is important that we understand, and when we get Deuteronomy, God's going to point this out clearly, that we are not entirely in control of our lives. Someone else is. Something else is. A being greater than ourselves is in charge of our life. What's the Sabbath have to do with that? God's saying, sit down. I've got it under control. Sit down and know who's there. Questions or comments? Yes. Off the top of my hand, I think it's the host means an assembly or a lot. I think it's the host of his creation. Without looking too deep into that, Jerry, but that's a great question. Let me just glance at it real quick. Yeah, it may even be the host of the heavens, which we see, which would be the many aspects of the sky. But I think it's more general, the many, many creative works that he did. So, all right, Exodus, the 20th chapter. Would someone read verse 8 through 11 for me?
Nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
All right, so we see a few things here. Number one, we make this command very simple: keep the Sabbath day. Remember and keep the Sabbath day, right? There's more to it. We see reference back there to the Genesis, the 2nd chapter that we looked at earlier. He's given the reason for the command. And then thirdly, there's this most commonly overlooked part of this commandment. What is that? How does this commandment start out in verse 8? Or verse 9, rather, the second phrase. What was that, Sharon? Well, I'm joking entirely, although I'm not. It's here, so we're going to deal with it. But I am joking about a 5-day work week being unbiblical, because the purpose of the statement is in 6 days you shall do all of your work. That's what he's getting at. The point of the commandment is on the 7th, rest. Rest. So to do that, he's saying you have 6 days to do all of your work. The 7th is set apart. Rest on it. All right. I do not want to see a raise of hand. Christian, did I just forget to turn this on, or did it die? I see the battery's dead. I can swap these out while I talk at the table. Do not raise your hand for this. How many of you, again, do not raise your hand. I know I'm phrasing it that way. How many of you either currently believe or have been taught that Sunday is the New Testament Sabbath? Again, do not raise your hand. The reason I don't want you to raise your hand is I'm going to make an argument against this in a moment. And I don't want to make it personal. I don't want you committing something. But the probability is that most of us have been taught or believed or currently believe that Sundays are the New Testament Sabbath. I did not ask for, I'm with you again. I did not ask for a raise of hands. I was taught that. Ernie, if you wanted a very, very, very big butt chewing, what would you do on a Sunday with your grass? Yeah, go out and mow your grass on Sunday. I'll never forget, I was living in Apollo. I was working 6 days a week and worshiping with the Graffs at Trenum. And my grass was so high. And oh man, I was so happy that I lived 60 miles away from my grandfather. Because I mowed my grass on a Sunday. Oh, I was so worried about that. Now, okay, for some it can be the sign of respect. Here's the, okay. Now, and I want to hear your dissension in just a moment, but here's why I didn't want it too early. I do want a raise of hands for this. How many of you on a regular basis go out to eat on Sundays? Okay, some hands didn't go up. How many of you stop and get coffee or gas on Sunday? All right. I think we've almost got all of you. How many of you turn your electric on Sunday? Yeah. I think I've got all of you. Okay, Ernie, I'm sorry. This will be way more direct than I intended it to be. Okay, good. That's hypocrisy. To say it's wrong for me to work, but then to take action to force someone else to work. Biblically, the Jews, and we'll look at these verses in a moment, were not permitted to do that. That was part of the Sabbath. You don't work. You don't make your employees work. You don't make your slaves work. And you don't do business with anyone on the Sabbath. It was a day of rest. Here's my point, and then there's some ideas that we need to get out. And I think we're all going, I think most of us, and I'm certain Ernie and I will agree in a moment. It was a day of rest. My point is, if we are going to say that Sunday is the Sabbath, we'll deal with the biblical aspect of that in a moment, but then we've got to be consistent, right? We've got to actually live it, which is a whole nother aspect. Now, go ahead, Ernie, because...
6 days, that's what you do.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's why I said a few moments ago, it's almost like I was trying to pretend like I knew the future. I said in a few moments, Ernie and I are going to agree. Now, we are going to see the relevance, because that's what we've been doing, is looking at the Old Testament, right? Looking at these 10 commandments, then looking at how Jesus applies them. And there's relevance here. But I think we need to be clear for our sake and for everyone else that we're attempting to impact on what it is and what it is not. By the way, history shows us that many Christians met on Sundays before or after nightfall. Do you know why that is? It was a work day. That's what Sunday is. I mean, just the verse we read. 6 days you shall do your work. On Saturday, rest. Monday's the first day of the week. It was the first day of work. The first day of the week, and it was our Monday, right? Now, culture plays into this. That's the culture that the Jewish mindset came from. It plays into it for us, too. I have a problem, in my mind, with categorizing Sundays the weekend. I think we're going to get around to respect here. Ernie brought up in a few moments. Sundays are not the end of the week. It's the beginning of the week, and there's great significance for that. It's why we worship on the first day of the week. It's why we recall Christ's death on the first day of the week. We do it on the day he resurrected. He starts the week with rising from the grave. So there's significance, there's tie-ins here, but oftentimes what you'll hear is Jesus repeated the 10 Commandments except the Sabbath day, right? The 10 Commandments except the Sabbath day apply today. I think what we're going to see by the end of the study, hopefully, is that would be going a little bit too far, too. Sure.
But every Sunday you wore a white shirt. Respect. And that's something that we've lost a lot of over time. It's like everything else. The more things that are forced on you, the more you're going to lose the feelings for it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so let me give a verse first. Then Leviticus 19 is where you'll find, I believe, 33 and 34 in particular is where you'll find on the Sabbath day that the servants and the slaves, everyone were not allowed to do work either. Then if you would turn to Deuteronomy, the 5th chapter. And I mentioned culture. There are aspects of culture that can be very beneficial, and there's aspects of culture that are not beneficial, right? And as Christians, I maintain it's our job to, not to complain, but to impact culture. And I say that to say this. When I was growing up, there were no sporting events on Sundays, right? My kids have sporting events most Sundays, right? And here's something interesting. Christians complain and complain and complain about that. But where are they on Sundays? At the sporting events. You see what I'm saying? Growing up with Grandpa in the car, you and Bob would have been there too. I can remember Bob and Grandpa complaining about the lack of blue laws. Its stores were open when we're on our way to the restaurant. Do you see what I'm saying? We are not victims. We are not bystanders. We are participants. Understanding culture is important, right? Understand it was part of our culture that Sunday was set aside as a day not to do business was a wonderful aspect of culture at that time with great benefits to it. But understand that it was cultural that didn't exist at biblical times is equally important. Understand that I play a role in impacting those situations is important, right? Here's Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15. This gives us a reason for the Sabbath. Then we've got to get to the New Testament. Observe, verse 12, the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock. Oh, I forgot to mention all the animals aren't allowed to work either. Or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. 15, you shall remember you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of the land with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God command you to keep the Sabbath day. Why were they commanded to keep it? You were a slave in Egypt, and who delivered you? God. I was told not long ago, well, you're self-employed. It's easy for you not to work on Sundays. This is when I was running my own business for a living. I don't know, maybe I do need to comment on that. That's absurd, right? That's absurd. There's financial stressors, right? That play a role in all of us. How do we tie these two together? Mark, the 2nd chapter. And what we're going to see is Jesus make a point that I think solves all these opposing stresses together. I'm going to start in verse 23. On the Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck the heads of the grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read that what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, now he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he gave it to them who were with him. Now, this for years was a real struggle for me, this passage, because Jesus is confronted about breaking the Sabbath. And his argument is I think was a just argument. I'm not breaking the Sabbath. Here's why they said he's breaking the Sabbath. It wasn't that he was stealing. The Jews were commanded to leave and not harvest land along the road. So sojourners and travelers and the poor could have something to eat. And so his disciples, as they're walking, are taking this and they're plucking the heads off, and then they're going like this. And what they're doing is they're separating the oats from the chaff so that they could eat. The church the teaching of the synagogue of the temple decided they really need to know what was work and what was not work. They decided, and this is in writing and part of their oral teaching, that that is threshing. And here's logic behind it. Same logic we hear today. Where is that line? Right? We're all the time worried about that line. I personally came to believe that God is the one that needs to know and does know where that line is. But how much do you have to thresh before it's work? Well, it'd be better if you didn't thresh any. So they considered that threshing. And it's my understanding that's why they're accused of doing work. Jesus does not make the argument that they aren't working. They're not breaking the law. What does he do? He uses an example of David clearly breaking the law and says, you hold him up as a hero. Oh, with that, I ran out of time. Did I leave that as a cliffhanger for you for next week? Can we talk about that? No. We do need to come back to this. So I will tell you, the answer is in 27. And I will leave it open for your thought a little bit. And hopefully, I do apologize for not wrapping it up, but next week, Lord willing, we'll wrap up the Sabbath in the Christian age. Thank you.